Can I have you scooch over like 2 inches this way? Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Am I looking here? Or where do you want?
Yeah, right into there. What does social impact mean to you?
Well,
It's okay. They'll edit this stuff too, so.
Well, I kind of figured
Working with the Social Impact Fellows forces you to think outside the box.
It's just been a great way for people at GLG to give back.
It's a way to engage with the community.
to get to work with people that I don't work with every day.
I was kind of just bugging my manager nonstop until I was able to take part.
It's really exciting to see what, literally one phone call can do.
The clients we're helping are so different.
it has such huge impacts on some of these organizations that we were able to work with.
If I could do that all day and for that to be my job, that would make me so happy.
I will sometimes even just work on some of my social impact projects in the evening while catching up on Game of Thrones.
Learn about things like as weird as worm composting.
Can really be just so impactful, given how, and a lot of times they're really starting from scratch.
Cool. That's a great answer.
We try.
To help grow a nonprofit and develop them from one stage in their life cycle to another is something that very few people have access and ability to do. And that's what separates GLG's social impact from other forms of giving back.
All right. Good evening. Welcome. I'm Jen Field, Director of Social Impact, and this is really awesome to see so many GLGers in one room, and I think I've spotted a few people from other offices who've snuck in. I'm really glad to have you all here. So as you know, through Social Impact, we extend our learning platform to nonprofits, social enterprises, foundations, impact funds, and our flagship program is the Social Impact Fellowship. It's a 2-year program for leaders of emerging nonprofits and social enterprises that have articulated inflection points and questions that we can help them with. And every year, we bring them together from around the world. We've done this for 4 years. However, this is our first time in Austin. I don't know what took us so long. And we are in Austin because this is our biggest office and because the biggest group of GLGers involved in social impact is based here. We are also here because the fellows themselves asked to come to Austin. So a little bit on the fellows. We are joined by 12 incredible nonprofit and social entrepreneurs, and just yesterday we welcomed 6 new leaders to the community. They rose to the top of over 550 applications for just 6 spots, and they're working on incredibly complex challenges around the world that face really significant populations. So I'm just going to take a minute to announce the 2017 fellows by name, and if you can hold your applause till the end. Matilda Ho of Yamashiji is here from Shanghai, China, and she runs an online farmers market, and she is really transforming the way Chinese consumers and farmers interact. We've got Juke Zhu is here from Queens. He runs C4Q, and he's lifting people out of poverty through technology training, access to employment, and he's also increasing the diversity in the technology sector. Josh McAllister is with us from London, where he runs Frontline, which is supporting and training social workers so that they, in turn, can support the vulnerable families and children that they work with. Anushka Ratnayake is here from Mali, where she runs MyAgro, which is dedicated to the financial empowerment of farmers across the continent. Steph Spears is with us from Cambridge. She runs Solstice, which is increasing American households' access to solar energy through shared solar, community solar. And Kia Williams is here from California and Atlanta, or a plane in between. And she runs Serum, which, as she describes it, is the Match.com for unused medicine. She's getting excess prescription drugs from pharmacies and health facilities into the hands of people who need them and can't afford them. So welcome, you guys. I'd love to give you a round of applause. And we have the 62016 fellows that you see listed there, and you're going to hear directly from many of them tonight, and you're going to hear about the rest of them. So we want to have fun tonight, and we will, and it's GLG, so we want to learn a few things. We want all of you to learn a little bit more about the fellowship, but also about why GLG invests in social impact. We want the fellows to learn more about the energy of GLG. I think they're learning that already. And about our company's commitment to supporting them. And we want to recognize and extend our appreciation to many, many people in this room who make servicing social impact clients really possible. So, learning and conversation will be the theme for the evening. And our first conversation is going to be with the person who led our company's investment in social impact, who is the biggest champion for its growth, and who conceived of the fellowship in the first place, and that is our CEO, Alexander Saint-Amand. All righty, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to you guys.
Awesome. So I have a few questions for you, Alexander, about the origins of social impact, et cetera. And everybody in the room, if you want to think of some of your own questions too, we'll have some time for Q&A in about 10 or 12 minutes. So, Alexander, we made the formal investment about 5 years ago in social impact, but can you talk about, it's been around since the beginning of the company, and can you talk about some of those early days?
Let's talk about that for 1 second, because I hadn't thought about doing this, but I do want to say that we thought of this idea of building a social impact program that would be directly comparable to what we do, and I don't know how we found you, Jen, but we certainly didn't have it before you got here, and now it's here, and you're all here, so I want to congratulate Jen and also Rachel, who works with her. Yeah. But sorry, what was the question?
Talk about days before Jen Field and Rachel Wald at GLG.
There was nothing.
I know they were dark.
It was nothing. It was dark. No, well, I will take you back. Actually, I was just thinking about this. I had an interview question that I used to ask people, and we were just with Jason Ballard at Treehouse talking about culture and how you build a culture in a company. And my way of doing that when we started the business was that I would ask people in the interview process, what would you do if you had $50 million in the bank? And you learn a lot about someone from the answer to that question. It's a hard question to answer. Some people would say they'd start, by the way, the only failing answer, just so you know, and don't tell your friends if they're interviewing here, because sometimes I still do it, is nothing, just no answer. I have no idea. But if you didn't name a charity, I would say, so that was your 50 million that you're gonna do, you're now gonna, and I don't wanna know if you're gonna buy a car, I wanna know what you're gonna do with your life. And if they said, I wanna be a teacher, I would say that's great, and I'd say, let's just say if they didn't name a charity, I'd say, if I gave you another $50 million to give to a charity, what would you give it to? And there's a large category of people that can't answer that question. I'm not saying they're bad people, but they would just sort of go, I don't know, I don't know. And I wouldn't hire those people because I didn't find them to be curious about the world in the way that I think is so essential to be working at GLG. And I think we really formed the culture around that curiosity and also about just a general engagement in so many different subjects because, of course, working at GLG means being curious about everything that everyone's working on all the time and wants to learn about all the time. So that was really the foundation of the culture. As far as the program itself, let me take you back to the beginning of the company for a second. If you don't know the story of my sort of personal, where the idea came from for me, my mom got sick. I'll tell you the story in some detail. When I was driving to high school after spring break of my senior year in high school, my mom got lost on the way to school, and she just didn't know where we were. And by the time I was going to college, she couldn't drive me to college. And by the time Christmas came around, when I came home, she didn't know who I was. And so my dad is a doctor in New York. We have good access to doctors in New York. And we went and got a first opinion in New York, and we got a second opinion up in Boston. And the diagnosis was idiopathic cortical atrophy, which for our life sciences team, healthcare team, it means her brain is shrinking and we don't know why. And so I went back to college with just the knowledge that my mom's brain was shrinking and we didn't know why. And I ended up obviously maybe not obviously, but I had a hard time. I ended up leaving school, did a lot of other things. One of the things I did was become a reporter. And when I was a reporter, I learned to go and talk to anyone about anything, which is a nice thing about being a reporter. But what I really wanted to be was a doctor because I wanted to figure out what was wrong with my mom. So I went back to college and I was planning on being a doctor. and I was going to graduate late because I took a few years off of college, whether I worked as an EMT throughout college. I mean, I was really a chemistry major, really serious about it. And when I graduated, I was going to have a little block of time after college, between college and med school. And I met some folks who'd started a publishing company in New York, Gerson and Lehrman, and the publishing company was going along, and it's a long story, but through them I ended up meeting an investor who started sending me to medical conferences. And I started going to medical conferences, and I was been a reporter, and I was kind of acting as a private reporter. And I arrived at some point at the American Academy of Neurology, or I think it was that or a similar meeting. And I started talking to doctors, and I realized that I would talk to someone about Lewy body dementia and frontotemporal dementia and all these different diseases that I thought my mom might have. And I realized that the idea of getting a first opinion and a second opinion was a very limited idea, and that you could actually talk to all the doctors if you want to. You could literally talk to every one of the top doctors in the world about something. And if you ask smart questions and you're obviously mindful of their time, et cetera, you can learn, as I learned, what actually happened to my mom. And so we repositioned the business around this idea, which originally we were going to call AskNewton.com. It was going to be a website where you find the best scientists, all around, what would you do if your mom got sick? I mean, would you just read something and call it a day? Should you just get a first opinion? How do you learn if you really need to know something? You really need to know it, like your mom is sick. And I believe that what you would do is what I did, which is you'd go try to find all the best people in the world and figure out and ask questions and ask questions and ask questions. And so that's where the idea came from. And I went to, if you don't know, I went to 30 or 40 medical conferences a year for several years, and I loved every second of learning everything about everything that our clients were working on. But it was all built around kind of that core idea, that just desire for learning when you really need to know. And fast forward, as we grew the business, it scaled, and we have customers and investors and consultants, et cetera. But then just by happenstance, we had scaled up, and then Katrina happened. And during Katrina, we had a few folks who were from New Orleans, and one of them said, can we do something to help? And I said, sure, why don't you go down there and figure it out? And so he flew home, and he got a few other GLGers, and they went home, and they figured out, I think there were a lot of different things we helped with. The one I remember is that we worked on how to supply power to the temporary housing units that the government, the Army Corps of Engineers was building to put up people who lost their homes. And what I learned pretty quickly is that, it's one thing to volunteer, in a circumstance like that, but we actually brought GLG with us so that the Army Corps of Engineers was able to talk to people about how to restore power that they would have never met. And that seemed really powerful. And so we built off of that and had other opportunities to act in those kind of circumstances. And at some point I realized this is actually a thing. And that's where, that's a long version of kind of how we arrived at bringing you on board.
Thank you for sharing the early story. So as I recall, my first year here, we were piloting with different types of organizations in the social sector, and I thought I had some great ideas. And you came to me one day and said, I've got it. Can you tell us your idea for the fellowship and what you sort of originally conceived?
Well, the fellowship, first of all, what really happened was I came back and said, she was here to do social impact, and I said, I've got a new idea, let's do a fellowship. And I think the whole response was, great, let's do it. Not sure she knew what it was yet, but great. I'm on the board of something called the Partnership of the City of New York, and they run a fellowship for, I would say, people who are civically minded in New York who are also rising in business, and they come together a lot. And what I realized, we were doing these one-off social impact projects, but what I realized is that GLG is built around one-to-one learning, as we all know. And as I like to say, that GLG is a little bit like Uber meets Harvard. So you have the Uber side, which allows you to scale the one-to-one, but the Harvard side are the constraints that come with learning, primarily finding the best students to get the best teachers, best students, best teachers. So you have to think about those two things, what comes from Harvard and what comes from Uber. A few things come from Harvard, but one of the other things is your classmates. So when you're at Harvard, of course, it's the relationship you have with the teacher, but it's also the community that you build with your classmates. Now, when we started GLG, we were a one-to-one learning business, but we started doing these breakfasts at the Yale Club, and we'd have one doctor and 8 to 10 clients, and it became a community. And I started traveling with that community, and they all knew each other. So when I again went back to the partnership of the City of New York, when I went to the partnership of the City of New York meeting, and I realized that the fellows were all there and they were learning from each other, as much as they were learning from the experience of the partnership, they were learning from each other. I thought that's really the full experience we're trying to create. And so that and the fact that we really wanted to select for the best students, because our business is built, again, if you get the best students in the fellows that we have, then you can get the best teachers in the world, and you just keep going like that. So it was a combination of wanting to build a community of the fellows, and I thought they'd learn from each other, and then also a selection process that would allow us to really constrain and focus on people that really could use us, as Jason Ballard said, to go 10x.
So pulling up a bit from sort of the evolution of social impact and the fellowship, on a higher level, why is it important for companies like ours and our peers to have a social impact practice and do work like this?
I think you have to know the heart of the mission, and you have to understand what the heart of the mission is. And our mission, again, comes from, I think, a real desire to solve a really hard problem for me personally, which is very personal and tangible, but then also comes to the idea that it can be essential for everyone, with the constraint that it can't go to everyone yet because of that dynamic where you have to get the best teachers and the best students. And so if that's the heart of the matter, you have to make the heart of the matter real. It's not just going to kind of exist, as someone said in our earlier session, that if you break your culture, you can't fix it. And I think that's right. You have to anchor the culture in the idea. And if the idea is both that this can become essential for everyone, and also that that can have a very particular social impact, and that the culture is a group of people who want it to have that kind of impact, by the way, as evidence from all of you coming out tonight, which I very much appreciate, then you have to do something with that desire. And I think it's exciting. I think I heard the number that I think about 250 GLGers have participated in projects. Is that right? To date, which is a huge percent. And I know that there's even a wait list well beyond that, if not 4 times that, to participate in these social impact projects. So we want to create those opportunities. We can talk about the future. But to me, it feels like the heart of the matter. And that's why we're supporting it and want to keep building it.
Awesome. We would love to hear from you guys. If folks have questions, there are a few mic runners around. So just raise your hand and a mic runner will find you. But while we're waiting...
maybe I should ask Jen a question.
Ooh.
How about that? Yeah. So Jen, she's not prepared for this question in any way. Jen, what is the thing you're most excited about for this year and that's new in the social impact program? And maybe I'll give my answer too.
Sure. So this is going to be unrelated to the fellowship for a moment. But through social impact, as I said in the beginning, we extend our learning platform to our fellows, to nonprofits, to foundations, et cetera. But when you look at our clients, financial services firms, private equity firms, consultancies, a lot of them are trending towards impact. It's still small, but Blackstone, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, et cetera, they all have some sort of impact area. And it's interesting because we have seen, and probably some of you in this room have, we've seen our traditional clients come to us and say, so what is environmental and social governance and what is impact investing? So here they're making big announcements about their impact initiatives, but behind the scenes coming to us. So we are bringing in experts to our network who are leaders in those areas. So you can really see that we can kind of play a role in this whole continuum of working with the best nonprofits and social enterprises, with grant makers, and then with people who are deploying their funds for a financial and a social return. I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us.
I don't think I can do better. I think the one thing I'm interested in general for where we are is thought leadership on this subject. We have a lot of exposure to what people learn. We have a lot of exposure to what people want to learn in all sorts of sectors. And now we're learning about what does a social entrepreneur need to learn in the stages of their growth, and how do they go 10x? And I think the more exposure we have to that question, the more that we can teach the world about how that happens and expand our fellowship because we've learned those things along the way.
Absolutely. I think I see a question there.
Hi.
Can you say your name?
Yes. My name is Claire. I was wondering how you select the social impact fellows in a qualitative way. So what values do you look for in these organizations?
Do you want to take that first? Great. We look for a lot of things, and you're going to see these characteristics embodied in the fellows that you'll hear from shortly. Curiosity. Really, we look for our GLG values: curiosity, fresh perspective, judgment, etc. But we are working with nonprofits and social enterprises, so we're open to both structures. We are looking for people who are past proof of concept, so their organization's not brand new. They've been doing it for a few years. They've got a product, they've got a program that is impactful, that it's working, and they want to get from either 2.0 to 3.0. So they have complex goals and the related challenges that come with that, and they understand the value that we bring. We're not giving funding. We are giving unlimited access to our teachers. And one of the fellows in this room, I hope you don't mind Minaj, but I'm going to share the quote that Minaj gave to me and Rachel, which was, what GLG is giving me right now in my enterprise's stage of growth is more valuable than capital. And that was sort of a moment where we're like, okay, this is working. So it is curiosity. It's an organization that is past proof of concept. It's scaling. Most frequently has some sort of a technology component, and the problem that they are working to solve is really big and affects a significant population of people around the world. Yeah, I see a hand in the back.
Hello, my name is Alana. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I was wondering, what does the follow-up look like after the fellows interact with GLG? Obviously, we have the 2016 fellows here, but what about years before that, and what does our involvement look like there?
Great question. So just this afternoon, we were at the business of a 2015 fellow who's still really active in our community, and we are very conscious that we can't kind of turn off the spigot, if you will, at the 2-year mark. Some of these relationships might naturally end. They might have gotten where they sort of had set out to get to when they joined us 2 years prior. But what we have said is that once you're a GLG member, you are always a GLG member. We just might not be quite as proactive. We might not be pulling projects, but we're always going to take the call. And with the number of GLG people that we have that want to get involved with social impact, supporting those projects is not going to be an issue.
I think there's probably one thing we want to do, not to put the fellows on the spot, but there's a great expression. This business is about teaching and learning. And there's some great data that I found recently that I've seen many times before, but it's pretty cool. So if you read something, I think you have a 5% chance of retaining it. And if you hear something, you have a 10% chance of retaining it. If you have a conversation about something, and now we're at GLG, you have about a 50% chance of retaining it. And if you teach something, you have a 90% chance of retaining it. And GLG is built around that principle. I think what I'd ask our fellows is to be available to teach, which hopefully isn't too much to ask because I think you learn through teaching. So for me, we're building a community of fellows that over time not only is a group of students, but is also a group of teachers. Not to put you on the spot.
No, it's great. It's a great point. And I just want to add one more point that hasn't necessarily come up yet, but the reaction from our council members, those of you who are working with social impact fellows and clients will know this, but it's amazing. You would think that they have access to the opportunity to teach, to share their skills and experiences with organizations in the social sector, but they really don't. And it's like 90% say they want to do it again. 3/4 of them, are willing to change their rates for doing this work. So that kind of reaction from the council members has been really terrific.
Yeah, I think my wife calls this problem, there's a problem called the Cupcake Problem, which is, you see an organization that you really want to help. Let's say you're an engineer and you really want to help a company, and they say, great, can you have a cocktail party and raise some money for me? And you think, I'm an engineer, doesn't seem like a great match of my skill set that now I'm serving cupcakes at your party. My wife calls that a cupcake problem, and she's been asked to serve cupcakes even though she's a banker, et cetera. I think that's true for our council members. You're in Idaho and you're a power person and you know about power, and you don't necessarily know how to give back on a power problem. And then Katrina happens, and someone needs to build a system that powers thousands of mobile homes all of a sudden, and all of a sudden you can give back your skill set. So what we're appealing to is a people's chance to teach when they're great at teaching in their greatest area of expertise.
All right, anybody else? Can't see anybody. Yeah, I see one. Sorry, the lights make it hard to see.
Hi, my name is Adriana. I was just wondering, beyond the summit, if there were other opportunities for the fellows to interact and learn from each other, as I can imagine that's a big part of the fellowship opportunity.
Yes, Rachel puts together virtual events for the fellows, and we're starting, now that we're in our 4th class, to have locations where there's more than one fellow, and we hope that over time that will grow. But you guys are busy. The fellows are really busy. I know they cross paths in various places through the work that they have, so I think this time together that we're able to spend with them is really special. But I think some partnerships or some kind of collaborations have already started to emerge. But the annual convening is really the time that we can put away our phones and spend time together. So I want to close with one question for you, Alexander, and then we're going to hear from some of the fellows themselves. And that is, you conceived of the fellowship. What does your crystal ball have in it for the future of social impact? Any ideas to share right now?
We're scaling it as fast as that we can figure out how to scale it, which means we want to make sure that everyone has the best opportunity possible. Like I said, I think we're over time reaching a critical mass of being able to learn from what we've taught. And as we learn from what we've taught, then we're going to be able to do more. And I think we can publish on this subject. I think that we can, and then it's not whether we're not a publishing business, we remain an interactive learning business, so no one get confused. But I think that we're going to be able to scale the fellowship, and I get the question all the time, how do I participate more? And I really appreciate that enthusiasm from you. I can assure you that we're working as hard as we can to build the fellowship, to build the overall program, and to give you all a chance to do this kind of work.
Awesome. Alexander, thank you so much for coming to Austin and for joining us.
Thanks to you guys. Oh, and I also have to thank, I also just like to thank our awesome events team who always crush it. So
amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Well, now we are going to have 2 conversations. The first will be between Ashley Pakula, who is a senior research associate on the hedge fund team, and Misan Rewane, who is the co-founder and CEO of Wave. Following their conversation, we'll be joined by Carl Rayner, who recently transitioned from corporate research to business development on an AFS, together with Jake Wood, the co-founder and CEO of Team Rubicon.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you so much, Misan, for being here. It's so wonderful to have you, especially since we finally get to meet in person after talking on the phone over this past year, and it's just really a privilege to have you in Austin.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yay. Yay. Well, just to get started with everything, in your own words, would you be able to just share what Wave is with everyone and what led you to co-found it?
Great, sure. So WAVE stands for West Africa Vocational Education, and we are tackling the youth unemployment crisis in West Africa by finding and teaching hardworking young people in West Africa the skills that they require to get that first job, to start a career and build a brighter future. And we do this training them and matching them to entry-level work.
Awesome. And what sort of brought you into that? What made you want to co-found Wave?
So I have the long version, I have the short version.
Okay.
The medium version is that when I was around 6, I for some period of time wanted to be a teacher. And so it was one of those things that your parents or friends come around and then they ask you, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember saying, oh, I want to be a teacher. And the room froze. And my dad said, you know that you'll be poor and frustrated and unappreciated, right? And I just remember being a bit stunned, but knew at that point in time to not push back, not argue, just sort of let the silence hover. But I remember thinking at that time that my teacher was probably one of the most important people in my little circle. And she was responsible for making me smart and making me feel like I could do anything. And I just knew at that moment that there was something wrong with that. The fact that I was being discouraged from being a teacher meant that there was something wrong with this system. And so I remember just, as a young kid thinking, I want to have the job of the person whose job it is to fix that thing. with the education system. So fast forward many years later, coming out of college and management consulting, I have first cousins who weren't fortunate enough to come to school in the US. And having seen their experience in the education system in Nigeria, and seeing how our paths have diverged, how the conversations that we are able to have, the opportunities that they are able to have become more disparate from mine because of that lack of access to quality education, made me passionate about wanting to do something about it. And so WAVE was born out of meeting other young West Africans who were also passionate about this problem, but we forced ourselves to think about the urgency of the 40 million West Africans who have already been shortchanged by the education system. They're not going back to school anytime soon. They have 40 years of useful life in them, and the continent has essentially written them off by blocking their access to opportunity. And so we wanted to do something about that urgent problem. How do we find these young people, and how do we break down the barriers that are stopping them from getting formal employment and growing their incomes and increasing their potential?
Thank you for sharing that. And obviously, WAVE has had a lot of success, and I'm sure there's a lot of joy that comes with doing this work. But I guess, what has been challenging for you? What's been hard about the work that you do?
Our fellows, we talk about this all the time. You catch us in a room, we're like, oh, let's just talk about all the challenges. So something we also have to remind ourselves is just to pat ourselves on the back about all the things that are also going great. Yeah. Krista knows that. But yeah, I mean, besides the regular challenges of just feeling overwhelmed and not being sure, like imposter syndrome, do I really know what I'm doing? And which is where GLG helps a whole lot. It's like, oh, I don't know the answer, but you should check with Ashley or Aoife on that and see if they can find the right experts. But that's actually one of the big challenges is you are building a team and we're hiring for attitude and training for skill. That's one of our principles that we encourage our employers to do. So we have a lot of young people who haven't worked at this level before. And so finding access to resources for professional development for them. I usually joke that in Africa, and I think in most parts of the world, really, if I could sell trust in a bottle, I'd be a billionaire. People just don't have a level of trust in our neck of the woods. And so trusting that people will do what they say they're going to do, knowing that you don't have the recourse, there is no litigation culture, judiciary to help to have that recourse when people don't do what they say they're going to do is really tough for a business. So we try to find diversity on our team by having a group of people, and you said this today, I think earlier, Alexander, people who are long-term optimistic, but are skeptical enough to have a plan for when the vendor doesn't show up tomorrow with the things that you already paid him 60% of the fees to do. And so just that level of self-awareness and understanding how do you build plan B and plan C. Like as we always joke on our team, we don't go to bed until we have plan C in the bag because A and B will inevitably fail you. So those are some of the day-to-day challenges around doing business. It's finding the right talent, it's building trust, it's convincing people from a different part of the world to see the impact when they can't come on the ground and see it, and just convincing people to buy into what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And you mentioned turning to GLG kind of when you have these questions and you face these challenges. How did you find out about GLG and the Social Impact Fellowship?
So that was a fairly easy one in a way. You guys are doing a great job in terms of getting the word out there, but we had two of our funders who actually separately told us about this program and said, hey, we think WAVE is at the inflection point where this will be useful. You're talking about WAVE 2.0 and a shift in your strategy from direct impact to indirect impact and working with replicators, and this could be a helpful fellowship for you. And so those two different funders, I think they also wrote nominations for us, but that was how we heard about it. Otherwise, we were in our own little corner and we really wouldn't have heard about it.
Well, glad to have you. And then just to close, I know that we've done a lot of different projects together this year with Rachel, who's here tonight, and Aoife in our Dublin office. But is there a particular project that really stands out to you that has really made an impact for WAVE and just your team?
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice I got from Jake actually last year was just this idea of like, don't let your senior team come to you with problems until they've even spoken to GLG first. And so that's been just helpful for us in terms of lots of really like day-to-day problems around performance reviews and compensation structure and ride sharing. But for me, I think one of the most impactful, which was tied to our initial application, was this idea of how do we start to figure out what are the elements of job matching success so that we can do this at scale. Right now, we operate very much headhunting, matching each employer to each trainee, and we're trying to figure out from those who have done this at a larger scale, how do you do it effectively? What are the right criteria? And so when you were able to connect us to Chief Product and Marketing Officer for Monster, speaking with the Chief Human Resources Officer at Procter & Gamble, or also at Adecco, I think one of the funnier ones was just trying to learn from eHarmony and the chief data scientist at eHarmony, like how do they think about matching in terms of relationships, because matching employer-employee is actually even harder. And that was a very helpful conversation where eHarmony said, we actually tried to do jobs and it failed, so good luck to you if you figure that out. But yeah, so that definitely is one that's been ongoing and has been really impactful for us as we think about how to lock it down and scale it up.
That's awesome. Well, I know that we're all really grateful that we get to help you in your research and in your work. Really appreciate you being here tonight. I know myself and Rachel and Aoife and Dublin all just really look forward to continuing our work together. Thanks. Thank you. Now we're going to turn it over to Carl and Jake.
All right. Hello. Do we need these?
It's
Maybe?
happening.
It's here.
Don't fight it.
2 Marines on stage, open mics.
It's about to get weird.
So you guys have seen his bio. Jake Wood, co-founder, CEO of Team Rubicon. A little bit that you don't see, and I'll tell a little bit about Jake. Born and raised in Wisconsin, double majored at the university, or born and raised in Nebraska, double majored at the University of Wisconsin, where he was an offensive lineman for the Badgers. Graduated from the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, which I would say is arguably the most difficult school the Force Services has to offer, and he's now co-founder and CEO of Team Rubicon. I met you about a year ago. Jen emailed me and said, Carl, we've got this new social impact client. There are a bunch of Marines in Los Angeles. I think they're going to like you. I show up in a suit and proceeded to get roasted by 6 Marines and a former Navy fighter pilot. And it turns out that not only were Jake and I Marines, we were both part of the mighty, magnificent 7th Marine Regiment.
Yet.
Stationed in lovely 29 Palms, California.
Love it.
Love it. And fought in the same places such as Nowzad, Sangin, and Musa Kala, Afghanistan.
Lovely spots. No 4 seasons, but they're great spots.
Yeah, there's a river and some mountains. So Jake, we're here tonight. The hurricane season's kept you busy, but we want to focus on Team Rubicon. We want to focus on your mission. So please tell us what you've been up to. Tell us about Team Rubicon.
Yeah, so Team Rubicon's a nonprofit organization, and effectively what we do is we recruit, train, and deploy military veterans for disaster response work. And so what we're trying to do is repurpose the skill and experience that these military veterans gained during their time in service and use it to make communities around the country and ultimately around the world more resilient in the face of increasing disaster frequency and cost. And then what we learned as we were doing this over the last couple of years is that the unintended consequence of that work is that by giving these military veterans this new mission in life, we're helping to restore that sense of purpose and community and identity in them, which is really, I believe, and we believe, the fundamental foundation of a healthy transition away from war and into peace.
Thank you, Jake. So you've sent us quite a few difficult requests. I'd like you to maybe talk about 1 or 2 projects that you've sent our way that's kind of helped you, and then maybe go into kind of how you thought about running Team Rubicon prior to GLG and then post-GLG.
Well, I'll answer the second part first. So as Marines, it's very easy for us to assume that we're not the smartest person in the room. And so I would like to think that culturally we have, maybe outwardly a bit of arrogance, but like inwardly we really value humility, and we really value that curiosity that people talk about. And we encourage people to ask really, really hard questions, and we want people to acknowledge when they don't know the answers. And so GLG has really helped us to, further embraced that cultural principle internally and given us an outlet when collectively in the room, nobody has the answer. And so over the course of the last 12 months, Misan, I'm flattered. I was not the person. It was actually Mr. Ballard from Treehouse who said that last year. But I actually took that same quote away, and I told my team the same thing. Like, when you guys have impossible problems, let's turn to GLG and see what we can get them to answer for us. And so, it's kind of ranged for us from we were making a transition at the top of our kind of executive team at the CIO role. We really wanted to rethink everything that we were doing with data. We knew we had to reconstruct our entire data architecture, the systems integrations that we were running. So we were going through a CIO search. We engaged you guys for that. All the way to, in the middle of our response to Hurricane Harvey, there were a bunch of Superfund sites that got contaminated, and we wanted to make sure that our volunteers were going to be protected as they were going into some situations that had very real physical danger posed to their health. I think some of the things that were most valuable to us internally related to our volunteers. Culturally, the lifeblood of our organization are the people that we send out into the field. We've got 65,000 volunteers in the organization. One of our cultural principles is we call our volunteers gray shirts. So it's gray shirts, or mission first, gray shirts always. And so how do we take care of them? And so we're engaging GLG frequently, trying to think about how we scale culture. How do we deliver a culture for our volunteers that would in many ways be similar to what you and I experienced in the Marine Corps, where one of the cultural maxims of the Marine Corps is every Marine a rifleman. Meaning, at the end of the day, regardless what your job is in the Marine Corps, every Marine has to be able to pick up a rifle and fight. And that's like fundamental to what that branch of service is. And so for us at Team Rubicon, how do we bring that forward and make it so that every gray shirt at its most fundamental level was the exact same, whether it was me as the CEO or the volunteer that just signed up yesterday? How do we kind of level that playing field? For the surveys that we were conducting, how is it that we design better surveys, make them longitudinal, bring in third-party research, control groups, randomized control groups, so that we can actually have better validity and fidelity in the data that we're providing. And those are going to advance the organization moving forward because it's providing better insights upon which we can make better decisions.
How would you say you conceived this idea, and how were you able to launch it and scale it into these 275 American cities? We in no way conceived of the idea. I found myself an unemployed former Marine sniper in January 2010, and the Haiti earthquake happened. And I remember watching the Haiti earthquake unfolding on CNN and thinking to myself, I'd been out of the Marine Corps for about 60 days, and sitting there and watching and thinking, I can help. And so I called up a couple of organizations and offered my time and my services, and they all said, thanks, but no thanks, text us $10. And I just thought, that's so, I'm like that power worker in Montana. There's more that I can give than texting you $10, And so I hung up the phone, probably rudely, and called up all the guys I served with, and we organized a team of 8. It was 6 veterans, 2 doctors, and we went down to Port-au-Prince. We got there about 96 hours after the earthquake, and for 3 weeks we ran these medical triage clinics in the hardest hit areas of Port-au-Prince. And effectively all we were doing was running counterinsurgency operations, and we just thought to ourselves, we can do this. We can build a better mousetrap when it comes to disaster response by recruiting better human capital. And we came back and we incorporated. We never looked back. So Houston's 160 miles away. I think a lot of us here in Austin felt effects of that hurricane. What was it like going down there? We've seen the photos. I think a lot of us have friends there. And what was kind of the feel on the ground when you guys arrived?
Well, so on the Friday the storm was making landfall, I remember turning, I was in Los Angeles with my leadership team, and I remember turning to my CO and I'm saying, we don't have boats, and I feel like we're going to need boats. I swear to God. And then, Saturday we were getting the first brief, and then Sunday we're getting a brief, and on Sunday the Houston mayor or the police chief puts out a public call and says, everybody with a boat, we need you to put your boat in the water and start helping people. And I'm sitting there, and we have all these boat rescue specialists, people that actually have that technical skill in Team Rubicon. And but we'd never organized it programmatically. And so I'm sitting there and I'm just chewing on this and I'm thinking, oh man, this is gonna be a risky decision. I should really call down and tell Dennis to go buy boats. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about it for 3 or 4 hours. And then finally I call, my VP of field operations and I said, David, go buy boats. He's like, we just bought 6. Why are you calling me? You're delaying us from getting them in the water. So it was total chaos. I know you went down there. You just like our story in Haiti, you helped organize some people, and I think I'll leave with this because I know I'm out of time. These situations they're devastating. They destroy people's lives. What we always say at Team Rubicon, in the face of what we see in American communities today, which is kind of giving us all a little bit of heartburn, is that if American communities acted every single day, every day of the year, like they act after a terrible disaster happens, we'd be living in a really special place. Because you see the absolute best in people come out. And if we could just find a way to capture that and have people live and treat each other like they treat each other after these circumstances, we'd be living in just the most amazing place in the world. So I hope we can do that.
I'm supposed to give this.
All right, thank you. All right, those are some tough acts to follow, but we're going to do it because we are inviting 2 fellows up on stage next. So as you heard from Alexander, GLG's early days, our roots are in healthcare, and a big percentage of the fellows that we've worked with over the last 4 years are in healthcare. And it is my great pleasure to invite up Barbara Bush, who is co-founder and CEO of Global Health Corps, and Krista Donaldson, CEO of D-Rev. All right, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
So Barbara is working on the talent side, and Krista is working on the product side. So Barbara, let's start with you. I'd love to get the sort of founding story out there of what led you to become co-founder and CEO of Global Health Corps.
Definitely. Thanks everyone for coming. I never thought I would work in global health. I was working in design, actually. I was studying architecture when I was in college, and I was really lucky during my time in college. I was super creative. I loved the idea of designing things, and I was lucky to take 2 weeks off of my summer internship in New York to travel for the launch of PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which all of you, if you pay taxes, are responsible for, and I hope you know that. 20 million people are alive because of it. But at the time, it was in 2003, and if you were living on the continent of Africa, no matter how wealthy you were, no matter how connected you were, if you were HIV positive, you could not get the drugs that you needed to live. Pharmaceutical companies were not distributing them to places considered developing. And I went on this trip, and I was totally, this is very cliche and very naive, I was totally shocked at the fact that there were hundreds of people waiting in the streets for drugs that existed, that if you were in the United States, you could get them. But if you were born in the wrong place, you could not get them, and it meant that a disease that in other parts of the world, in wealthier parts of the world, was just a disease that you could live with. It was a death sentence where you were born. And I just couldn't believe that I lived in a world where we had these drugs, where we weren't waiting for a scientist in a lab to come up with them, they existed. And we live in such an incredible time where we have the knowledge and the information and the technology to make sure that millions of people around the world can live a healthy, dignified life. And so if we have all these tools, why are they not being used well? So I kind of threw the design career into the
You're
trash.
still using it.
I'm still using it, but Krista's using it better, and pursued global health. And what we found is that health systems around the world are weak, and yet we have the tools that we need. And so we every day competitively recruit exceptional young leaders who are 30 and under, and they join us, and they every single day are working in the gray area of broken healthcare systems. And throughout the year, they go through our training that's focused on policy change and advocacy and entrepreneurship, so that in 10 years, we will have thousands of global health corps alums in positions of influence and power, and they will be working with each other, serving people better, and making sure that we take advantage of this incredible time to be living and people can live.
Awesome. Thank you, Barbara. Krista, can you tell us what D-Rev is, and you, as an engineer by training, how you came to be CEO?
Yes, I'd love to. I do want to start out, though, by saying that design, I really see it as problem solving. So I'm not joking when I say, like, Barbara's still using the skills, and that's one of the things I love about design, because really all of us can be designers. So my background is engineering and product design, and I always had like this very strong social bent. And the funny thing is, similarly, I kind of was avoiding medicine and healthcare because my dad's a doctor, and I think that was like my mild former rebellion growing up. But I worked in Kenya for a number of years on water pumps, and it was during the embassy bombing, and it had a real effect on me, thinking about how poverty is related to security and related to terrorism. So I ended up working for the US State Department in Washington, but my portfolio was electricity reconstruction in Iraq. So Jake and I have bonded over that. But for those of you who might wonder why I made the switch, I wanted to understand the links between the two. And at the time, the US government did not have a lot of engineers, so I was very busy very quickly. And the interesting thing between my experience working on water pumps in Kenya and working on power plants and power distributions in Iraq is that both of them have widgets that people were focused on. Like with the water pumps, people were focused on the pumps, right? And with rebuilding an electricity sector, it was like, how many power plants can we get up and running? Without thinking, like, what are these pumps delivering? And what are these power plants delivering, right? Like, I had a guy at the Al Rashid Hotel. We weren't really allowed to do much in the green zone, as you can imagine. So I would go over and have tea with one of the guys at the Al Rashid Hotel, and he said to me, and this is like one of the most poignant moments of my life. He's like, you Americans, you can put a man on the moon, but like I'm not getting any light when I flip my switch at home. And at the time, we had spent a lot of money, about $4 billion, I say we, the US government. And it really got me thinking about systems, right? Like the systems, like what needs to happen for these products to have impact? So fast forward, I actually, personal, I'm telling you this, but I actually found out I was pregnant on my last tour in Iraq and decided it was time to come home and not be in war zones while I was carrying a child. So I was kind of figuring out what to do next, and I was recruited to D-Rev. And D-Rev at the time was this really cool skunkworks of like technology for good. But it wasn't very well defined beyond that. And the first thing I came in, which did not make me super popular, it was like cancel almost all the projects. Because I felt like we had to do a few things well to prove a model that technology and the systems could be built to have true impact. And so what D-Rev is we're a nonprofit medical device company, and we focus on health issues that disproportionately affect the poor. But speaking to the systems, we sell our products through the market, which means that they have to be very affordable, because our focus is India, East Africa, basically like all the areas where there's gaps, particularly at referral facilities, referral hospitals and clinics where there's highly, highly skilled doctors, a decent infrastructure, but that missing piece is the technology. And like what Barbara said, like there's the tools, the technology, the know-how, it's that missing piece. And D-Rev didn't really start out, as I mentioned, in health, but we narrowed in on that very quickly because the projects we kept were around health. And as you can imagine, as we dug in, more projects just kept coming up. And we were building these networks and these trusted advisors who just kept giving us more and more work. So we are now very squarely in health, and we really want to be like the medical device company that is focused on the issues that no one else is addressing but are critically needed.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Krista. So I want to drill down a little bit more into can you guys share examples, Barbara, of a fellow and his or her journey through your program and potentially afterwards? And then afterwards, Krista, can you tell us about a product, the design process and the incredible impact that it's having around the world? So we'll start with a fellow.
Sounds good. Oh my gosh, I could talk about 1,000
You can talk about
fellows.
two.
I will talk about two. I might talk about a third. I'm going to group two. So our fellows always work in teams of two, and we work in East Africa, Southern Africa, and the United States, in Newark, Boston, DC, and New York. And our fellows right now are from around 40 countries, but they work in teams of two from two different countries always. So they are a little dream team for the year. And this is critical to us because it's really important that we are creating a global group of leaders to solve global health issues. And you have to practice every single day working across cultures to get good at it. And so our fellows are working across cultures with each other every day. So in our very first class of fellows, perhaps our first fellow, was a guy named Amit Salvi. And when we were starting, we asked all of our partners in ministries of health their biggest gaps. And we were thrilled that basically none of them requested doctors or nurses or medical professionals because they already had those folks on their team. And their goal was to keep people healthy rather than treat them when they got sick. So this opened up the field to a lot of people that otherwise considered themselves not in global health. Amit applied to us. He had graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in engineering. He was working at the Gap, and he was working on their supply chain. So he was getting Gap, he was on their jeans supply chain, getting Gap jeans from warehouses into Gap stores. Applied to Global Health Corps, he got accepted, and he was partnered with his co-fellow, Jafari, who was working for the biggest cell phone company in Tanzania on their supply chain. You can get a cell phone anywhere. So he was working to get cell phones from warehouses into stores. And when they joined us, they started working for the Ministry of Health on the island of Zanzibar, and a third of the time there were drug stockouts. And so you can imagine what that means. If you are a mom, your kid has malaria, you go to the doctor, find out they have malaria, great, you're gonna go just get the drug your kid needs and they're gonna live. Except a third of the time, the drug that you would need would not be there because they weren't forecasted well. So all of a sudden, malaria, which is totally treatable, is deadly. And so Amit and Jafari joined the two-person team. They used their same skills, but this time they were working to forecast and procure drugs from warehouses into clinics, into the hands of the patients that need them. So same skill set, like the guy in wherever with the power background, but I would argue they made a bigger impact in global health than in retail. But what's cool is that when they completed their fellowship, Jafari was hired by the Ministry of Health. He now oversees supply chain for the country of Tanzania. Amit moved to Kenya, and then when Ebola broke out, he moved to West Africa, where he oversees supply chain for the country of Sierra Leone. So they're both making a huge impact with these skills that they created in another field. And then I will be very brief. One other story of our fellows is fellows that were working in Newark, New Jersey. So it was two fellows. The American fellow is named Sonia, and she was partnered with a fellow named Adana from Nigeria. And when they were working there, they were working on Mayor Booker's team. He was mayor at the time. And they were trying to decrease how expensive healthcare is in Newark because most people living below the poverty line go to the emergency room when they are sick because you have to be treated if you're at the emergency room. It's enormously expensive. Also, for someone to get that sick, it's pretty brutal because there are interventions that can be had. So Adana grew up in Nigeria where the backbone of her healthcare system was community health workers. So there were not enough trained medical professionals, so she grew up with very trusted, respected community members who were trained to essentially go door to door and take care of people. And she suggested that to the city of Newark, and she and Sonia could have really used GLG because they did all the research around what a community health care worker model could look like in Newark, New Jersey, and they started rolling it out, and it was saving like 40% of the costs were saved that year. I don't attribute that to them, but I attribute it to the fact that the most at-risk people in the community were visited on a daily basis by trusted community health workers who likely spoke multiple languages besides English, so there wasn't the power dynamic of language, and they would do everything from walk them through the medicines they needed to take to go through what they had in their pantry if they had diabetes, and help them get food stamps, et cetera. So it's an idea that has been perfected in another part of the world and is equally applicable here. But the reason that I love talking about Adana is because she's an example of where I think we will go. When she joined us, we do a 2.5-week training at Yale for all of our fellows, and she stood up and she said, it's going to be so convenient when I am the Minister of Health in Nigeria. And Celine is the Minister of Health in Rwanda, and Diego is running the Gates Foundation, because we're all going to know each other. We're all going to have a shared vision of what health equity looks like, and we're going to really get work done. I burst into tears. I was like, this is exact, you're so spot on. This is adorable. And then when she completed her fellowship, she got accepted to Harvard for her PhD, being paid for by the Ministry of Health in Nigeria, with the stipulation that she returned to work for them. So it's starting to come true.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Barbara. And quick follow-up question is, how many fellows have you worked with to date?
We've worked with about 1,000 fellows. We have 150 in our current class. They're all 30 and under. If y'all want to apply, you should.
No, you can't leave GLG. So there are many more stories that you could tell.
Sorry,
Krista.
not sorry.
Krista, will you tell us about some of the products that D-Rev has designed?
Sure. I'm going to tell you about our first product line just because it's the most advanced and we've learned the most. But it's the Brilliance line, and what it is it's phototherapy for severely jaundiced babies. So something we don't think about much here in the U.S. because when a baby's born, heel prick, determine what the bilirubin levels are, and I'm guessing I don't need to explain what bilirubin is to you all in the room, but a neurotoxin, like the body's just starting to process it, but if there's too much, it accumulates in the brain and can cause brain damage or death. But phototherapy is blue light that shines through the baby's skin, breaks down the bilirubin in the blood, and the babies pee it out. But the interesting thing is when we were doing field research and talking to doctors, particularly in India, one doctor said, in global health, if you're talking about innovations, it's either like essentially professors pushing something that's in their like sweet spot of research, or the global health community is dictating things around sepsis or asphyxia or preterm complications, which are all big complexities that need to be solved. But he's like, I actually have I'm losing children to jaundice. And what he was doing is putting babies out in the sun, because obviously there's blue light in the sun, but what does the sun has? It also has UV. There's only so many hours of light a day. Like phototherapy, if you have intense light, you really need about at least a day and a half of the baby under the blue light. My colleague who the doctor talked to was intrigued by the fact, just like on a very simple level, that light could solve a medical condition. So we started prototyping. We also learned that devices were about $3,000 to $4,000 here in the US, and that was translating to sometimes $10,000 in places like Nairobi. So very expensive for a referral facility, particularly public hospitals that just don't have those kinds of capital budgets. The more we dug in, we also found that if phototherapy devices were at all in hospitals, they were tube bulbs or compact fluorescent bulbs. And so you have to imagine like this kind of clunky overhead light with 6 tube bulbs, and 3 of them are going to be burned out. And we collected data with Stanford and some other places, and like 70% of the time, if there's a device at all, the bulb is burned out. There are bulbs burned out. And in some enterprising hospitals, we would see bulbs replaced with a white bulb. And sometimes, once actually in Nigeria, we saw bulbs painted blue and put back in the device. And just to be clear, these aren't effective. Like, it's not delivering the intense blue light that you need. And the reason why the bulbs weren't getting replaced, and people had their reasons, but these bulbs were very expensive. They were $20 per bulb in Delhi, $200 per bulb in Kampala. And you've got 6 of these bulbs, you need to replace them at least twice a year, and then on top of it, you had supply chain issues. So now we created this picture of what the challenge was. So Brilliance, we designed with LEDs, and so many of you know LEDs. The blue LEDs, there's been a lot of innovation in the last several years. The Nobel Prize a few years ago was for, I think in physics, was for blue LEDs. And the manufacturing of blue LEDs too, like you can tightly bin them now so that you can more predict the quality of light. So we capitalized on all of this and designed Brilliance. And Brilliance is $400 in India, $500 in the rest of the world, plus shipping and handling and tariffs. But it took off. And now Brilliance, 5 years since we've launched it, is now in over 40 countries. And we estimate have treated, actually we're just waiting on our Q2 numbers, but we estimate we're going to have treated over 320,000 babies. Thank you. The thing that I'm really excited about is that based on a partnership we have in India and targeting, we have a relationship in India around manufacturing distribution, but we are targeting high-need facilities because it's one thing to get a product to market and treat children, but our goal has been to make sure that it's getting to where the gaps exist, right? And so we estimate that of those numbers, about 80% of those children would not have received effective care otherwise. And because we're using LEDs, those babies don't burn out. They're going to last 50,000 hours, and that's not the first thing that's going to break on these devices. So we think about this from a design perspective, and now where we are at D-Rev, just to kind of give a little hint going forward, is we want to replicate this model. We just launched another product recently, and we've been using GLG a lot, particularly with our new product development.
Will you say the thing about GE? Is that a different?
Oh, no, I'll tell you. Yes, thank you for spurring. So one of the things actually, Misan talked about direct impact, which is like our products, and indirect impact, which is like changes that you're creating too. In India, we have forced the drop, we believe, I can't prove it actually, but the price of phototherapy devices have come down to compete head-to-head with us. And India is important because that is 20% of all live births in the world and is by far and away the highest mortality in the world for infants.
And just quickly, how many products are in the D-Rev portfolio right now, and how many countries are your products being used in?
So we have 5 products total, 4 in our newborn health, which are all around phototherapy and jaundice. And we have a prosthetic knee that just launched in August for global sales. And we're in, last count was 55 countries, but I just saw the latest numbers, and I think we're closer to 60 now.
Amazing. So we heard a little chuckle in this corner when I think it was Misan referred to challenges that you guys face in your jobs as leading growing organizations. So maybe as a final question, in no particular order, either of you can take it first, is what is one challenge that you encounter frequently in your roles? Just one.
We have so many.
Just one.
I'll jump in. I think, one of the things I really appreciate about GLG is you're picking us up at a time when I think many of us, are in this inflection point, and we have all these giant things ahead of us. So we're dealing with these mundane problems. For us, the biggest challenge has been both putting the processes in place as an organization and getting ready for growth, which we're just coming through. And I would say also making sure our staff and our board is ready. So one of the challenges I've talked about with the other fellows and with our GLG advisors is really around how do we make sure that both the board and the staff are working together for where we're heading and not looking ahead. And I think someone said earlier too, when you're driving the car, you're not just looking right in front of you, you're looking way down the road. And that's where we're trying to get.
Thank you.
I think challenges that we deal with that are really tough is that global health is extremely hard. The places that we're working are often not fully stable. So for instance, we were working in Burundi and we've had to put our operations there on hold because it seemingly might be another civil war there. And that's brutal when our colleagues are Burundian, our fellows are Burundian, they grew up in a civil war, and the last thing that they ever want is to think that they will live in one again. So, those are the challenges that rip your heart out, and there's no right answer, and you just try to love everyone, and that's all you can do.
Well, Krista and Barbara, thank you, and we feel so lucky to be working with both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to close it out tonight for our grand finale, I am really happy to turn it over to my partner in crime for social impact, Rachel Wald.
Thank you, Jen, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight. I know that you guys are eager to get to meeting the fellows and getting back to the bar, but if this Texas crowd can give a native Texan a few more minutes, I want to introduce you. Yeah, hook 'em, yeah. All right. I want to introduce you to the 2 other 2016 fellows who we didn't have time to share on the stage. So we have Minaj Chowdhury, who is CEO and co-founder of Drinkwell. Drinkwell is a social enterprise based in India and Bangladesh, addressing the water crisis there. Water resources in those countries are fluoride and arsenic poisoned often and cause 50,000 deaths per year. So his work is really important. And lastly, we have Mehdi Jameh, who's here from Bayes Impact. Bayes Impact is a group of data scientists taking technology firm principles and applying them to big social challenges like unemployment, health and hospital management, and policing. As you can see, we get to work with some really incredible fellows, and that's reflected in how competitive the application process has become. So really, congratulations to the fellows. Thank you for sharing your work with GLG and for your attention this week. We're gonna wrap up our summit tomorrow, go back to our offices, and kick off a year of great work together, and we're really excited about that. And you guys, the GLGers, you've heard it a few times tonight. Our ability to service these clients depends on you. So thank you again for all of your hard work. And I want to throw out a couple other thank yous. So the events team, we literally would not stand on this stage tonight without you. And I think in New York, we get to see all the time the round tables and the other events that come through our office. But for those of you who've never seen the product that this team puts out, look around and thank them. And two other people, Richard Zacharides and Kim Niehaus, thank you for your support this week and throughout the year. We really depend on that as well. So we're working hard to expand opportunities for GLGers across the company to engage with social impact. And here in Austin, that will look like continuing to engage in Harvey recovery through our partnerships with Jake and Team Rubicon and SBP, also led by a social impact fellow. Also, hundreds of projects are happening every year for social impact clients, and that number is going to continue to grow as our fellowship community grows and other partners come on board. And so we're going to turn to you. So if you're interested in getting involved, and you haven't yet, you can take out your phone right now, or you can wait until you get back to the office, but we want you to email us at info@glgimpact.com. We need your name and your business unit. Just your name will do. But if whatever you do at this company, we really want to hear from you if you get involved. So is anyone taking out their phone? I can't tell. All right, two last announcements. You can take home a red book that's sitting on the tables. They highlight some of the work we've done over the last year. And you can also leave with a bag of cashews. These aren't just any cashews. These are from a company called East Bali Cashews, one of our first social impact fellows, working in East Bali communities to source and process cashews that are local and indigenous to the region and keep the income from that product locally. They didn't cut us a deal on these. We ordered them on Amazon. Super cool because they used GLG to understand how to get onto the Amazon platform and into the US market. So they should taste like a job well done. They'll go great with a shiner. Please enjoy the evening. Introduce yourselves to the fellows, and thank you again.